episode of Surviving the Survivor, we bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation? Better late than never, but we are here nevertheless. Welcome to Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And the reason we're a little bit late, I don't want to throw them under the bus. Our third guest, like myself, not the most tech-savvy person. We were trying to get him on, but now it is the COE's problem. And she's going to try to get Tom Brennan on, who is a private investigator for the Greenberg family. This is personally a very important show, as it is, I know, for our best guests here today. Let me just fill you in on the very latest, then I'll introduce the best guests, and we will get into it. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court decided last Tuesday to hear the case of Ellen Greenberg. Her death, as most of you know, was ruled a suicide back in 2011. Her parents, who will be here tomorrow night with investigative reporter Gavin Fish. You're going to hear me talking a lot about Gavin Fish tonight because he had an interesting op-ed piece. They will all be here tomorrow night. But nevertheless, Josh and Sandee Greenberg, they've been fighting for over a decade and spending well over $500,000 of their own dollars to get just the manner of death changed from homicide. From suicide to either homicide or undecided. The Greenberg family has been in a years-long fight with the city of Philadelphia over Ellen's manner of death since it was ruled a suicide back in 2011. It initially was ruled a homicide, so it gets confusing, it gets tricky, but the bottom line is it was officially ruled a suicide. When I show you a couple of animations, you're going to wonder how in the world that's the case. Ellen Greenberg, she was a 27-year-old first-grade teacher outside of Philadelphia. Approximately 6:40 p.m. On the evening of January 26, 2011, as a huge storm was rolling in. And here are some pictures of Ellen, who was a beautiful young woman with her parents. Ellen was pronounced dead as a result of 20 stab wounds, including 10 to the back of her head and neck. In addition, there were 11 bruises in various stages of resolution on her right arm, her abdomen, and her right leg. So there were bruising, and what people are calling signs of abuse. I know her dad, Josh, has been very vocal about this. Despite all the evidence to the contrary, the medical examiner, a person named Dr. Marlon Osborne, ruled Ellen's death a suicide. We are going to be joined, I'm hoping, in the next few minutes by retired Pennsylvania State Trooper Tom Brennan. He has investigated this case for the Greenberg family. He's actually investigated over 800 homicides in his career. To put that in perspective, we've got Phil Waters on every Friday with Scott. I thought he was at the top of the heap. He's investigated half that number at 400 homicides. So hopefully Tom will join us in just a couple of minutes. Meanwhile, delighted to introduce you to Laura Diamond. She is a journalist based in New York City, where she is working as a producer for ABC News' 2020. Some of you may have heard of that tiny little show. She's currently developing an independent docuseries on the Ellen Greenberg case. She got her start in journalism with an old school newspaper gig more than a decade ago, running around the 5 boroughs of Manhattan on breaking news, courts, politics, crime, and even more for the New York Daily News. Her work has also appeared in the New York Times, The Economist, The Atlantic, The Daily Beast, Huffington Post. The list goes on. She's a graduate of Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism, and obviously she is now part of STS. Scott Duffy really needs no introduction. He's on the show every Friday. He's becoming a bit of a Hollywood celebrity in his own right. He is a retired supervisory special agent. That means he was the boss in Delaware at the Delaware office. As you know, that is where current President Joe Biden lives. So when he was vice president, Scott has dealt in that world as well. He was dealing with violent crime matters, gangs, bank robberies, the list goes on. And prior to that, 5.5 years as a Pennsylvania police officer in the Commonwealth of PA. First and very obvious question will go to Laura. Laura, so many people have not heard of this case. First of all, welcome to you.
Thank you.
And by the way, Ned Smith, one of our favorites, who's not a man, loved me some 2020, been watching since Barbara Walters hosted with Hugh Downs. There you go. So it's a show. What got you interested in the Ellen Greenberg story?
About 3 years ago, I think I first came across the case when a very popular true crime podcast called Crime Junkie did an episode on it. And I remember thinking, that's just about the strangest case I've ever heard. There's got to be more story there. And started, just looking into it. And one question led to another. And I found it to be a very layered, complicated, interesting story indeed.
Yeah. And what's interesting, as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, 2020 has never done anything. Dateline's never done anything. Basically, because there's just kind of a beginning on this. This case has never been formally investigated. I mean, is that part of the reason? Obviously, with 2020 and Dateline, you need an ending to the story. Even if there's no ending, there's the middle of the story kind of falls apart at some point as well, correct?
Yeah, I think that, really, I mean, even though Ellen's death happened in 2011, really a huge amount of what we've learned has been much more recent since 2019, and then even more recent because of developments in the two civil cases, which I'm sure we'll get to. But there just wasn't, the Greenbergs didn't have access to the police file for a long time. There was no movement on either of the cases. They were facing a lot of resistance from the city and the courts. And so exactly, we just didn't know enough about the case. And so that has changed, very, very recently, actually. So it's, like you said, it's just kind of getting started.
Yeah. This is from our mod from the great state of New Jersey, which is where I'm from. But this is important. Gavin is in the chat, and he's going to be here tomorrow night, and he has led the way in terms of investigation, reporters' investigation into this case. And I'll be quoting some of his op-ed that he just recently wrote. It's interesting. His op-ed really kind of like jolted me when I was reading it and rereading it, and just again not believing some of the things that I was going to read. In this case, drags in the possible vice presidential nominee, Josh Shapiro. Everyone's actually waiting on bated breath for that announcement that is supposed to come today. He is currently the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, and he very well could be the vice presidential nominee for the Democrat Party. And he is tied to this case, and it's not a pretty look for him. And already, I know that pundits on the right side of the aisle are pointing out this case as a way to discredit Josh Shapiro. But to us, it's much more than that. And we'll dig into that in a little bit. Scott Duffy, you call Philly your home. I mean, I know you're right outside of Philadelphia. This is a real black eye on the city. It's a black eye on then Attorney General Josh Shapiro, who's now your governor. It's a black eye on Larry Krasner, who's now the district attorney. And the case has gotten kicked around. It's never been investigated, and it happened in 2011. What's going on in Philly?
That's a loaded question, Joel.
Yes, it is. And I don't mean wah-wah. I mean, what's really going on? I mean, let me ask it a different way. I don't want to throw you under the bus, but I mean, it seems like there's quite a bit of corruption here.
Yeah, I'd like to go towards more of a was the evidence followed? And with regards to everything you said, and the fact that the family members have to fight to get things that should rightfully be available, to me, raises red flags. Any investigation that I was involved in, there are obvious things that you can't disclose during the course of the investigation outside of that inner circle of investigators. And I would say that inner circle, of course, are the responding officers, the detectives that got assigned the case, to the evidence, to anything, to anybody within the Philadelphia Police Department that responded or had some interaction with evidence post the crime scene, to include the district attorney's office, and then, of course, the medical examiner's office. And ultimately, nothing should be investigated in a vacuum. You allow the evidence to take you where it's going to take you. If somebody, and it does happen because we're human, if let's just say the evidence collection or the crime scene investigation, there are failures, there are weaknesses that you could point out, vulnerabilities, and defense attorneys throughout the country, especially in the big cases where they are pointing out those vulnerabilities and things like that, that often can weaken the case. But if the evidence is strong, it's going to stand on its own.
Go ahead, Scott.
And from what I have seen, not only through you, Joel, because you're right, I lived just outside Philadelphia in 2011. And so even someone being within literally just a couple of miles from the crime scene, to really have no understanding of the crime. It wasn't a big broadcast. It wasn't something that captured Philadelphia for days, weeks, or whatever, to say justice for Ellen and so forth. As many of our cases can sometimes be when given that media light. And so a lot of what I learned was through your show, and then, of course, some of my own research. And it is very disturbing. I will always withhold judgment until I've seen more to say, oh, okay, there's something here. And absolutely, in my mind, there is something here to take this beyond where it's at now.
Yeah, well, I don't have the same training as Scott Duffy, and something smells really bad in Philadelphia. And I know Scott's an investigator. Investigators are always following the evidence. The problem here is it's just never been investigated, and it needs to be. And I think what Scott was just saying, too, about the media spotlight, I think it's starting. It took this long, sadly, but I think it's starting to shine a lot brighter, and it's going to get brighter in the coming weeks for sure. Gavin Fish here. Big shout out to Laura, who's been working for years in the background. Laura Diamond is our guest, in case you're joining. She's been on the background of the Ellen case. She's the real deal, guys, if Gavin is saying that. He means it. Then we've got a comment here from Alyssa. I have family members that are Leos in Philly, and when we discuss this case, they admit to all the errors in the investigation and firmly believe it's a cover-up. So let us get to where we are currently, and then we'll kind of work backwards. And again, I'm being really
and I just want to shout out back to Gavin. I think thanks, Gavin, by the way. Gavin was one of my first calls back in 2021 when I first got interested in this case. Called Gavin because I saw he had already done such incredible work on the case. And Gavin and I have probably been in touch about Ellen's case on a weekly basis for almost 3 years, probably. So he's put up with a lot. And obviously, we're both very passionate about this case. But yeah, I appreciate that. And I know you're having him on tomorrow.
Yeah. And no, Gavin doesn't get nearly the credit that he deserves for this. And if this case breaks wide open, it's going to be largely due to Gavin. And that's what Gavin will be on with Josh and Sandee tomorrow. And maybe we'll get Joe Pedraza, the attorney, as well. He's kind of been MIA, but a lot of people are away over the summer. Here is Tom Brennan. How are you, Tom?
Yay.
Fine, sir. And yourself?
Doing well. Great to have
Tom.
you back. I know you know Laura, and I know you know Scott Duffy, retired FBI out of Delaware, who lives in Philadelphia. I'm just getting everybody caught up, Tom, and then we'll get your intro. So the reason we're here today is this past Tuesday, we got word that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is now going to take a look at a pathologist's controversial ruling that Ellen Greenberg, this 27-year-old Philadelphia woman, that she died as a result of 20 stab wounds, that it was not necessarily a suicide. The Supreme Court has decided to hear arguments from both Ellen's parents and the attorney. The court here must ultimately decide whether Josh and Sandee, as executors of her state, have legal standing to challenge the medical examiner's findings. So basically, in each jurisdiction, there's a medical examiner, and they've got a lot of immunity and a lot of power. Tom, to you, you're another unsung hero in this case, as a private investigator for the Greenberg family. You've been working this very hard. How pleased were you to hear about this latest news that the Supreme Court is now going to take up whether or not, that there's standing to possibly change the death determination?
Well, I think I think it's really exciting, really exciting. It's something that we've been looking for, and thank God there's a court that's willing to hear it. And it just goes to show that if you fight hard enough, as Josh and Sandee have, over the years. I've known them now for 11 and a half years. And, it's been a struggle, real struggle. When I first met them, I told them, I said, you're going to have to be extremely patient. I said, because this is going to take a long, long time. And I never expected it to take this long. I knew it would take, anywhere from 6 to 8 years because of the corruption in Philadelphia. And thank God that Josh and Sandee had the willpower. And, it's, from a financial standpoint, it's really drained them. It's really drained them. I mean, to the point now where they have their beautiful home up for sale. So, they're a beautiful couple. They're, and to lose your only child and remain together, that's a huge accomplishment in itself.
I'm sorry to hear that. I did not know the house was up for sale. I do know they've spent upwards of $500,000 just to investigate the case. I'm sure it's more than
close
that.
to 6 or 7 now.
Yeah, I'm sure it's. Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure it's a lot more than that. Tear Dot here in the comment section. Philadelphia pathologist Dr. Marlon Osborne cited multiple stab wounds by an unknown person in his initial ruling. Then he did a 180-degree after meeting with cops. We're going to get to that, but that is true. Laura, to you, last year was a panel. There was bad news that came down from a panel of appellate court judges who ruled against the parents. Josh and Sandee requested to basically force the medical examiner to reclassify the case again from suicide to homicide or undetermined. But this panel that basically ruled, I think 2-3, it was a majority decision, said that, look, the parents lacked standing as a legal term over the medical examiner. So basically he said, look, what the medical examiner ruled, the medical examiner ruled on, and so be it. What was your take back then because that was another blow to them in this whole cycle of bad news that they've experienced?
Yeah, that was a 2-1 decision. And my understanding was that the judges felt that because of the way the law is written, their hands were kind of tied in terms of the question around standing, which then just raises a bunch of other questions, because the way the law currently is in Pennsylvania, this is my understanding, that even if the documentation on a death certificate is patently false, which, even Osborne himself said, yeah, it should be homicide. He said that after the fact, that, I agree, this document should be amended because it has profound consequences, what that document says. But the way the law is right now, that a medical examiner can't be compelled to review or amend their what they have in the death certificate. And so it's a question of who gets to ask or demand or request a medical examiner to issue a new ruling, or at least, revisit an old one. And that's the question the Supreme Court is going to ask. I mean, if the Greenbergs aren't the poster children for this being a decent question, I don't know who is.
Tom, I just want to come back to you. I mean, are you still actively working the case, and is there anything that you can share with us that's, new and positive or negative?
Yes. Uh, we we were able to get the police files um, through Discovery, and we have them. It's about 5,000 pages. I'm reviewing it. One of the things that in the police file we learned about the meetings, the two meetings, and they were in early February. Okay. Now, Osborne's ruling didn't come out until April, but uh, even Galino, his supervisor, was concerned that he did not contact the neuroforensic pathologist, Dr. Lucy Rourke, and the paragraph regarding Lucy Rourke's decision in the autopsy report was false. Okay. Even Galino thought that it was false. Also, through the police files, we learned that one of the first uniformed police officers at the scene saw blood on the fiance's hands. Okay. Now, if he's got blood on his hands, why weren't his hands photographed? Why wasn't his clothing removed? Why wasn't, all of that taken in evidence? There's flaw after flaw after flaw in this police investigation. I mean, it's totally ridiculous. And all they're trying to do with these meetings, with the second meeting with Galino and Osborne, they more or less, as Osborne told me, he said, I changed it at the insistence of the police. And I said to him, who in the police department has a degree in pathology? And with that, our conversation ended.
Wow. Yeah, Scott Duffy, I want you to pick up on that. That it appears that it was influenced by the police. I mean, you're retired FBI, you're a former police officer. Should that ever happen? Should a police officer be directing a medical examiner? It seems like a big problem right there.
No, and as I'm reading the comments too, with regards to Gavin, I know of Tom's work and having met Tom a few times, so it is an absolute pleasure to be in a show with him, and laud his experience. So, with regards to some of the things that Tom is saying, it is both sad because you have two prior law enforcement people that have sworn to uphold an oath, to uphold the Constitution, and you just follow the evidence. And it seems like there are simple missteps here, and those missteps have done what? They have become mountains of to climb with regards to getting back to the basics of what happened in the very, very beginning. For example, as Tom said, the lack of pictures. Yes, the lack of pictures, absolutely. The lack of interviews of the core group that's at the scene prior to law enforcement, and the lack of collection. Take everything. Take it all. This is not 1940s, 50s, 60s. This is 2011. This is modern day policing. And it's really sad to hear. And for anybody to have to spend astronomical amounts of money in order to they're just trying to get to a simple answer. And that answer is to, first and foremost, reverse the decision of a suicide and get it back to, at the very least, which should not be an argument, to get it to undetermined and then unhandcuff, law enforcement, new eyes, fresh set of investigators to go and say, what can we salvage from this, and get it to a point to say, this is not a suicide. This is a homicide. And who did it? It's mind-boggling to me, having spent so many years in law enforcement, to see that this is possible. I understand the corruption aspects. I got to go to some very simple arrogancy with regards to people who have overstepped their bounds, exerted themselves, and got people of high stature, professionals who know what they're doing, to look like they're bumbling idiots. It's just astounding to me.
Yeah, and now the case, by the way, has been kicked over to the Chester County DA, and we'll get to that as well. But there's a question here, Tom, for you that I'd like you to address. Very
Sure.
simple question. Wally wants to know, missteps or corruption? Is this just unadulterated corruption going on in Philadelphia here?
Well, when I was with the Pennsylvania State Police, okay, I worked in Philadelphia for about 8 years, okay, and I worked with their major crimes unit. As a matter of fact, we arrested Frank Rizzo's son-in-law, who was involved in sports betting and cocaine distribution. But anyway, there is a significant amount of corruption in Philadelphia. A large, very significant amount. That's why I told Josh and Sandee at the beginning of this that they were going to have to be extremely patient and what we were going to have to overcome. And this, I believe this is a case of, on January 26th, okay, the officers that were at the scene just took for granted what the fiance told them and left. Okay. And as one thing happens after another, when they found out the next morning or the next afternoon, when the autopsy was completed and Dr. Osborne said it's a homicide, I can imagine when they took that call from Mr. Olszewski, the ME investigator, when he called homicide, I could hear the shits going through the entire unit. Okay. So now the scene was not protected. Okay. No one sealed the scene to protect it. So the next day, when the fiance's uncle and cousin called to get in, and Melissa Ware, the property manager, she called the police, and the police told her, yeah, they couldn't go in. And she said, well, it's all bloody. And they said, well, that's up, cleaning it up is up to you or the occupant, but you can call crime scene cleanups and they'll send somebody out and clean up the scene. She calls crime scene cleanups. They come out, they clean up the scene. She calls the uncle back, says, yes, you can come over. But before they cleaned up the scene, Melissa Ware was protecting her company, the rental company, by taking a video of the entire scene, the entire apartment. The police, okay, the uncle and the cousin come in, and on their way out, they come in with using the excuse that the fiance needed a suit for the funeral. Well, they not only take the suit, but they also take the fiance's laptop, Ellen's laptop, and Ellen's work laptop and her phone and her car keys and credit cards. Okay. They leave with everything. And that's that's evidence. Okay.
Yeah.
So now the police who leave the scene unsecured to re-enter it, they have to get a search warrant. So they get a search warrant, okay, on the 28th. Well, when their crime scene folks enter the scene, they even make a note in their reports that they can't do their work properly because the scene has been cleaned and sanitized. Okay? So they throw some fingerprint powder around and you know, that's it. They leave. And it's one thing after another, one lie after another that's led to where we are today.
Yeah, and Tom is being you know, kind right now the way he's describing it, but for those of you who aren't sure that you heard him correctly, this was a very bloody crime scene, and an uncle who's pretty well connected in Philadelphia was allowed in to literally call a crime cleanup service to clean up the crime scene. And you just heard Tom say, because of that, they were having a hard time processing anything because it was professionally cleaned. I mean, if this doesn't stink, I don't know what does. But let's take a couple of steps back here. So, Laura, to you. So, Marlon Osborne initially ruled the death a homicide. We know that. Then, according to a court filing, there was some sort of campaign by the Philadelphia Police Department that was designed to pressure him into changing his mind. We just heard about that as well from Tom. There was some sort of clandestine, some sort of private meeting between the medical examiner, his boss, a representative from the Philadelphia DA's office, and at least two representatives from the Philadelphia PD. And after this, it's changed to suicide from homicide. Have you been able, I mean, I know Gavin has worked on this. Do we know what happened in this closed door meeting? Obviously, it was closed, so there wouldn't be transparency. And by the way, this is the suicide we're talking about. This is obviously animated images of what she would have had to have done to herself, not to mention with a giant gash on her top of her head. But look at where these two knives in the very top of her spinal cord. I mean, it's almost impossible to reach back there, let alone like, you know, stab a knife in there. But back to this closed door meeting, Laura, do we know anything more about it?
Yeah, the closed door meetings have certainly been the subject of a lot of interest. And Tom and Scott could probably speak more to this. I don't think it's unusual for police and medical examiners to confer on cases. I think that's probably pretty standard. What's strange about how it happened here was that the autopsy happens the next day on January 27th. And then the next day, we know much more about this very recently because of the discovery for the civil case. But the two police officers, or two of the homicide cops that were assigned to the case, met with Dr. Osborne the following day on the 28th. And then a few days later on February 1st, they go back and meet with Osborne again. This time, Osborne's boss, Dr. Galino, who was the chief medical examiner at the time, is also there. So is their lieutenant, Lieutenant Bell. And then somehow by the next day, February 2nd, it's looking like they're turning it towards suicide. But in order for suicide to make any sense, they would need to explain a couple things. The first being, is it physically possible? And the second being, was there a witness that could attest that Sam really did bust the door down and discover her like that? That's where the way the civil case lays it out is that's where you start to see some of the fraudulent evidence enter the equation.
And Laura, where are we on the civil side of things with this?
With the conspiracy case?
Yeah.
So they just concluded, and Tom knows a lot about this. their set of depositions and discovery and filed their, is it motion for summary judgment or response, something like that. Basically, it's in the judge's
Objection
hands
to
now.
facts. Objection facts.
Yeah. So the judge in the next couple of weeks or months will be deciding if it's allowed to proceed to trial, which the Greenbergs would very, very much like. They've always said the more information, the better. Put it in front of impartial people. Give it to impartial investigators. We have no stake. They just want the truth. That's what they've always said. So they would be very much want a jury trial, but we don't know yet what the outcome will be.
Scott Duffy, to you, because this is your world. Tara Ellis, I think, asked earlier on if this is reversed and they now say, well, it's a homicide, and they're allowed to go and actually investigate. How tough is it? I mean, this happened in 2011. The next day there was a crime scene cleaning company in there. Where would you start?
So you start with what you have, and what's going to be supportive of. So you have the obvious science to it. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a medical examiner. So I rely upon my medical examiner to say, this is the manner of death. This is the cause of death, et cetera, et cetera. And then I'm like, that's a lot of stab wounds. Is it? So you go with, and if I could back up, suicides are hard enough as they are with a single gunshot wound, a hanging, overdose of pills, and so forth. And then, of course, you go to the background and try to say, what's the state of mind of this individual? If you don't have anybody said, I saw it, there's a camera version of it, et cetera, that's in of itself a difficult task, and they're done routinely in the sense of there's so many. Now add all this where you're arriving on scene, you're like, that's something I've never seen before. There's one thing to arrive on a scene and saying it's another gunshot wound, it's another hanging, it's another this, it's another overdose of the massive fentanyl. But to arrive on something you've never seen in your career, first and foremost, that should just give great pause. And so with regards to what do you have what photos you do have. And that you have, hey, do you have statements with a lawyer, without a lawyer? What exists? And then, of course, looking at if this is a homicide, who are a pool of suspects? And I think, yes, I totally agree. It would be very, very difficult to prosecute a case like this going forward. If you're like, okay, we've reversed it. It's now a homicide. New investigators determine the only person we believe did it is this person. Is there now enough independent evidence to say, let's go and charge that person? It is a tremendous obstacle to get over because of the tremendous amount, I say, missteps, and I am being kind. Tom and can absolutely rip apart what has been neglected. This is gross negligence. This is reckless.
I had an investigation in the western part of the state. Took approximately 8 years, and the medical examiner just about 4 months ago changed. It was a hanging, 16-year-old hanging, and changed. There was no autopsy, but changed the cause and manner of death because of the evidence that I produced, changed the cause and manner of death from suicide to undetermined, so that a legitimate investigation could be conducted. And why the medical examiners, even in deposition, claim that the Philadelphia lawyers from the solicitor's office encouraged them not to change it, not to change the cause and manner of death. As a matter of fact, regarding the one wound that is that was identified as postmortem, the solicitor's office told them not to submit a written report, told Galeno. So you even have the lawyers now mixed in this. Okay.
I'm trying to fill some of the holes. So back in 2021, there was a little break in that this guy Galeno that the guests keep talking about, he was basically the boss, and he then directs a medical examiner named Dr. Lindsay Emery to do, I think she's independent at this point, to test some spinal tissue that was saved of Ellen Greenberg's by the city. And that's where she comes out in a deposition, this Dr. Emery, and says, in her opinion, at least 2 of the stab wounds in Ellen Greenberg's body had occurred after she died. She says, I mean, I think, again, what is significant here, this is in the deposition, is that there is no hemorrhage. I mean, lack of hemorrhage means no pulse. So she very publicly stated that. So that's one of the holes that needs to be filled in. So there have been the little bits and pieces that have come together and kind of congealed over this period of time since 2011. Tom, let me go back to you on this one. I mean, there was there's a question from Rosemary Romero, who's often in our chat, wanting to know if you've been able, have you looked at the fiance at all? A guy named Sam Goldberg. She wants to know if he has any history of any, nefarious acts, any dark side to him. Have you been able to figure any of that out?
Well, we have taken a look there, but my big concern now is let's deal with the cause and manner of death. As far as it, and once we assume, once we're told yes, this is a homicide, then we can start taking a look at, okay, who done it. Now, is he a person of interest? You're darn right he is. So, I don't want to engage in any conversation regarding that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I would rather defer to.
Well, let me ask Laura. I mean, Laura, he's said to be living in New York City, probably not far from you. Have you been able to garner any information about this guy? From what I've heard, he's works as a producer at a golf network. He got married. He's got kids. Do we know anything else? Well, I think you're muted, Laura.
Sorry about that. He got married in 2014, and they have 2 daughters. They live here in the city. And yes, as far as I know, he still does freelance golf reporting, but it's not really clear what his exact job is.
That's interesting. I mean, it's kind of crazy because New York City is a massive city, but when you live there, like I did and like Laura does, you bump into people. I'm curious what this guy's up to.
He does reside in a $2 million apartment.
In a $2 million apartment.
Yes.
That's interesting to know. New York City, that's kind of middle of the road, though, Tom. Well, that's like in Manhattan. That's someone who works at CVS during the day.
I'd like to get a little of that road.
Yeah. Little of that middle of that road. So I'm going to now defer to Gavin Fish, who's coming on tomorrow. He wrote an op-ed piece, and he says this now ties into the person who could be vice president of the United States. That announcement, as I said, expected. I'm waiting for my phone to blow up. It could very well be the current governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, announced as Kamala Harris's VP pick. We don't know yet. It is supposed to come any moment today, but Gavin Fish in an op-ed writes, the problem with Josh Shapiro for me, and hopefully for you, is that he took part in the cover-up of the murder of a Philadelphia school teacher, seemingly at the behest of one of his friends. When the Greenbergs got this news that I just shared with you about the spinal tissue and the fact that it was post-mortem stab wounds, the AG, his office back then, still supported a finding of suicide, and they pointed to some internet searches where Ellen Greenberg's computer showed that she was looking for a quote-unquote painless way to commit suicide. This had come up, or to unalive herself, I should
Well,
say.
I know where those searches came from.
Please let
how
us
they
know,
came
Tom.
about.
Yeah, please tell us.
Okay. Mr. Krasner was Sandee and Josh's first attorney. Okay, first civil attorney. Once he became district attorney, okay, he recused himself and sent the file on to the Attorney General's office. Now, the same people who were in the Philadelphia DA's office, and had reviewed and access to this case, are now the same people in the Attorney General's office. Okay. Now, when they get this case, I honestly believe, okay, there were two people when Krasner received the computers from the police to return to the family. He encouraged Josh and Sandee to have Ellen's computer analyzed. Okay. They sent it to a company in North Carolina. Mr. Cummings worked for Mr. Krasner, and he did Mr. Krasner's electronics. Okay. So when Mr. Cummings sent the computer off to North Carolina, when they got the report back, that report said that they found these shadow searches. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, the report that Mr. Krasner received from North Carolina, when I first got involved in this case, the first thing I asked Josh was, contact Mr. Krasner, have Mr. Krasner send me a copy of that report. So there were only two copies of that report, the one that Mr. Krasner had and the one that I had. Okay. Now, the documentation, once Stephanie Farr got involved in the case, okay, and Stephanie Farr, I gave everything to Stephanie Farr, the reporter for the Inquirer. Mm-hmm. She says that, Tom, they said they found these shadow searches, and she sent me the documentation that they sent to her. Well, guess what? Even the font on that paperwork was the same as what I had. Okay. So evidently, Mr. Krasner sent the Greenberg's personal file along with the district attorney's file. Okay. So the AG's office had both files. And I have several emails to Christopher Phillips regarding that, and he had no response. Okay.
Which is sometimes a big response.
Yes.
I mean, Laura,
I had Josh and Sandee contact Mr. Krasner to get their personal file, and Mr. Krasner says, I sent it to you. Well, he never sent their file to them, their personal file. Okay. And they even filed a complaint against him, which was reviewed by the state. Okay. And the state said, well, Mr. Krasner said he sent it to you.
Yeah. He's the DA now, by the way.
Yeah, he's the DA.
Laura, it's important to point out, I mean, Ellen was having some trouble. Her parents have been very open about this, that she was depressed. She was actually, I think, thinking of leaving Sam, or at least indicating that she might. Her dad, Josh, has been pretty open about the fact that he thinks that, at least on this day, he was hitting her, and possibly prior to that, he had been abusive to her. What do you make of this, this claim by Josh Shapiro's office at the time that, you know, she was looking for. This right here is certainly not, by the way, Linda says it'd be impossible for Ellen to do this. She would have suffered so much brain and neurological damage to her spine. She would have not completed this many stabbings, not to mention the pain. Let me get rid of that comment. But I mean, this is the method. This is not a painless way to go. What do you make of that statement, I guess, from the AG's office saying, hey, yeah, you know, she was searching this and that?
Yeah, I never understood why we're talking about computer searches when she was stabbed 22 times, including twice after she was dead. Why are we talking about computer searches? It's a bizarre deflection of the actual evidence at hand. She could have Googled how to kill yourself. I mean, it still doesn't mean anything. I find the attempts to distract away from the reality so ludicrous. But listen, there's no dispute that Ellen was struggling in the I would say at least month before she died. She had expressed a lot of anxiety to friends and family. So much so that she had asked her parents about moving home twice, which is a big, you know, why would a 27-year-old engaged school teacher living in Philadelphia with her fiance want to move back home to Harrisburg with her parents?
Yeah, maybe her fiance sucked. That's one idea, possibly, but that's just one possibility. But I didn't mean to cut you off, but this is important from Jennifer Levy here. The night of the death, there's a fruit salad being made, an unfinished fruit salad, and other things that lead you to believe that she wasn't in a state of mind where she was trying to unalive herself, right, Laura?
No, let's be real. She filled her gas tank on the way home. Mm-hmm. But I will tell you, looking at the crime scene photos, to me at least, it looks like some of her stuff was packed. If you look at the toiletries in her bathroom, her toiletry cases were packed. We know that she had asked her cousin, Debbie, who she was very, very close to, if her guest room was available. So you can connect the dots and read between the lines however you want. She did have bruises all over her body in various stages of healing. Guy DeAndrea, in his recent deposition, he was an assistant district attorney in the homicide unit at the DA's office. He had tried to reopen this as a homicide years ago, said that she was obviously being abused. That's what he says in his deposition, that this looks like the bruises of someone who's been repeatedly beat. And she was obviously really suffering with something, and I'm not sure that she knew who to turn to or how to deal with it.
And I agree with you. And look, I mean, people in their 50s, let alone in their 20s, with the pressure to get married, all that. I mean, they're going through a lot. We don't know exactly what was going on in her mind, but I think the consensus is that, you know, she was looking to make a change, certainly not looking to end her own life. Scott Duffy, I know that you have listened to the 911 call that Sam Goldberg makes, and you've got questions about that. I don't have the call. Maybe I'll pull that up or get Scott back a different time if he's willing to go through it. But Sam Goldberg, Scott Duffy, he does not call 911 first. He calls his cousin, a guy named Kamian Schwartzman. Again, Gavin Fish doing amazing reporting on this. That call lasts about 5 minutes. While that call is going on, his uncle, James Schwartzman, starts calling him. He doesn't answer. He is called. James Schwartzman is now calling him in a fury. And he's a well-known attorney in the Commonwealth of Philadelphia. Sam misses several calls from his uncle, and then eventually they connect. This is directly from Gavin Fish's latest op-ed piece, which I recommend everyone reads in full. It says, Kamian and James Schwartzman. So this is now Sam Goldberg's uncle and cousin, or cousin and uncle in that order, Kamian and James. We're at the apartment building sometime that night. I think I spotted Kamian on a security camera footage walking up to the building at about 6:34 p.m., right before first responders arrived. But in the threatening letter, they're threatening Gavin now, and maybe they'll threaten me. It's a good thing I know 10,000 attorneys now. He claimed he arrived with his father after 7 or closer to 7:30. Either way, they were on scene the night Ellen Greenberg was killed. I just want everyone to let this sink in. So he doesn't call 911. He calls his uncle and his cousin and then his uncle. The uncle is an attorney. They're high-powered attorneys. The cousin is an attorney as well. And the older Schwartzman, James Schwartzman, he runs, as Gavin points out, in the same political and social circles as Josh Shapiro, who could be the vice president. All three men come from Philadelphia's mainline community, which is referred to, as Gavin points out, as the crown jewel of the city. It's interesting to point out that James Schwartzman is the chair of the Ethics and Professional Responsibility Group. This is the uncle of Sam Goldberg. The day after Ellen Greenberg is murdered, James Schwartzman, this uncle, and someone else goes back to the apartment, as Tom pointed out, under the auspices of retrieving a suit for Sam to wear to Ellen's funeral. In Yiddish, we call that chutzpah. This is all according to the property manager. I'm just going to kind of stop it right there. I mean, Scott Duffy, I'm a bonehead. I know that you shouldn't be letting family into a crime scene, into a bloody crime scene. I mean, how, and this is just going to be a redundant question, I mean, how could the ball have been dropped so badly that this guy, who's an attorney, a well-known, prominent attorney in Philadelphia, can take his son and they walk into this crime scene and just start removing things? How in the world is it possible? And how is it possible that this happened in 2011 and nothing's been done about it yet?
Yeah, those are the big questions. And you know, there are some things I'm learning here, and which is just, it's important as a law enforcement officer to calm down and let the evidence speak, and don't.
Told you this is why I'd be a horrible police officer.
Not to become emotionally attached. That's ultimately what you do when you come into a crime scene, and just allow it to speak to you and follow wherever it takes you. And of course, we theorize. I can imagine Tom has gone into countless, and because of his experiences, saying this is a possibility, this is a theory, this is a thought, this is a suspect, and then the evidence kind of weaves its way, either supports or denies, and that's what you do as an investigator. Oh my gosh, it's what to have learned that the crime scene investigation doesn't take place until after the crime scene has been cleaned up. Am I correct in hearing that?
Yes, correct. You are correct in hearing that.
Yeah, it's law enforcement's job is to get justice, period. Choose no sides. And so law enforcement's job is to justice for Ellen, regardless if it's a suicide or a homicide, justice for her. And beyond a shadow of a doubt, to have exhausted every possibility and collect the evidence and then to devise the report to where this is the outcome, and let something or somebody tell us different. That's the way it is. It's neutral. I have no buy in any way. Law enforcement does not know Ellen, and so they are doing justice. And if it is a suicide, it would make sense across the board between the evidence and the common sense is lacking here, to where you then present your case to the district attorney's office, everybody in unison. And I mean no secret meetings, but no secret meetings to where nothing is able to be shared with the family that's ultimately brought in and saying, this is the saddest day for you. This is what we have, and this is what we are presenting. And if it's done in such a way that the evidence, the common sense, the facts, everything leads up to, the family will debate, but will say, I see that you've left no stone unturned, and this is a sad day, but we accept it. That's ultimately what it is. And so it just seems like from the get-go, it is a defending of a decision that doesn't make sense, defending a decision that defies all the evidence, and that's the outrage, and so thereby, I understand the thoughts, and to, for example, the Shapiro and the Attorney General's office and so forth, of, are they participating in a cover-up? That's for the powers that be and the investigators to decide. As an investigator, I would go back and constantly pull back to saying, what do we have that hasn't been tainted? And just about everything has been. But what do we have, and allow, just as little as it is, the 911 call, not tainted. You can't taint it. It is his words. That's where I go back to what you have. The very few pictures that exist, and there should be so many more, but the few pictures that you do have, do they defy the common sense of the story that's being presented? And the story that's being sold to us is, it's a suicide, nothing to see here, go away. So if you are able to say the things we do have, are they enough to say, bring this back to a decision of undetermined? So now neutral, law enforcement, neutral, to bring in investigators to say it is a homicide. Now, the panel here, and then of course everybody listening, can say, well, there's only one suspect. But if it's, then with the evidence you have, are you able to then sell to a prosecutor that move forward with the charges? That is an unknown. I couldn't answer that with what I have seen, even though everything so far defies common sense and facts. I always believe justice will be served, if not here, later. But
they say justice delayed is justice denied, but in this case, whether it's delayed or not, they need to get to the bottom of it. There's a few more things I just want to get through. By the way, outrage is one way to put it. If listen, this is a rinky-dink little podcast, as my dad would say. Up there on the screen, these are the big players. Josh Shapiro could be the next vice president of the United States. The district attorney, Larry Krasner. If you guys want to make a difference, go on Twitter and tweet at Governor Shapiro, or tweet at DA Larry Krasner. I'll tell you this: if the electorate in the Commonwealth turns against him, it's going to be a big problem. So he needs to address this. You guys have the voice. I don't. Make sure you're hitting him up. I say it every time we do this show. I never say it during other shows, I don't think. Please reshare and retweet this show on your social media accounts. If you're on Instagram, retweet it there. If you're on Twitter, retweet it there. If you're on Facebook, do it there. If you're on TikTok, get the word out. Hashtag it. This guy's going to be, Shapiro's going to be all over the news now. And let's get the word out there. I can't change a thing. Your voices can. And I've seen it happen many times during my news career. Tom Brennan, to you again, back to this, the night of the crime. I mean, there's a half-made fruit salad. The door lock's tampered with. Josh is talking, Greenberg, about that there were, I don't know that I've ever heard this, that there were some sort of restraints on her wrist. She's holding a pristine white towel, despite being stabbed as many times as she was. There's also evidence her body was moved. Among these things I just listed, Tom, anything that stands out to you that you want to go into a little more detail about, and I'll ask Laura the same thing.
Well, to begin with, if you look at the crime scene photographs, okay, the first photograph you take a look at, there's dried and coagulated blood on Ellen's face, okay, and the blood, you look at the blood flow is going horizontally across her face, okay, if you listen to the 911 call, you hear the fiance say she's on her back. Okay. Well, she's not on her back in the photograph. She's sitting up against the corner in the cabinets in her kitchen. All right. The dried and coagulated blood, okay, flows horizontally, not vertically. So it means she was moved. You know, why? Okay. As a matter of fact, when you talk about the Attorney General's office and the folks in the Attorney General's office being the same folks that were in the DA's office, one of the attorneys from the Attorney General's office, and I have an email from her, and she said that she called the law department in Philadelphia and told them that if the Pennsylvania State Police go and ask you for any records or reports or anything like this, don't give them anything. Okay. Why would one law enforcement agency call a law department and tell them, don't give this other law enforcement agency any records? Got me, you know. Then you have other things, you know. You have notes in the police reports of the meetings. You have notes. You have reports in the police reports regarding blood on the hands of the fiance. And you know, there's a number of other things that, you know, officers that weren't assigned to the homicide unit, okay, but they did not, okay, what they did at the scene, they documented, okay. What the other investigators did, there isn't any documentation regarding them.
Tom, let me ask you, going back to what you were saying earlier about the crime scene cleanup, and you said that the property manager, you know, to cover her own behind, took video. Does that video still exist? Have any of these crime scene cleanup people, have they ever been deposed?
Well, we subpoenaed the police to get copies of that video, and it's missing. Okay. It's missing.
Did they give you a reason as to why it's missing?
No. It's not on any, and it's not on any evidence logs. Okay.
Yeah. Laura?
They have sort of very conveniently lost different video. One being Melissa Ware, the property manager's video that she took of the apartment. Another being anything, we have the lobby surveillance cameras from 3 to 7 p.m. A very narrow window, which you can see lines up with the fiance's story. I went down to ask for help. You can see him going down to the desk and everything. But somehow everything before 3 p.m. or after 7 p.m., which would yield potentially a lot of new information about who was there that day and when, and then who arrived, and then when, you know, the uncle and cousin arrived later that night, that video they can't find. They just can't find it. And that's been the case with a lot of this very convenient losing of evidence.
And is that the Philadelphia Police Department that's losing all this?
Yes.
Yeah, this is unreal. I mean, I never heard that. So that,
you know, you have a knife in the, you know, the victim's chest that was never even fingerprinted.
It's just unbelievable. Okay. And from what I understand, the main chest wound into it was 4 inches deep, Tom?
Yes.
4 inches
to the hilt of the knife.
Yeah. Go ahead.
You know, and you know, it just, you know, just from as was said earlier about the common sense of things, okay? Just the common sense of things. You know, I have been involved in homicide investigations all over the world France, Germany, Italy, Canada, 2 in Israel. You know, criminal personality behavior transcends culture. You know, an asshole over here is an asshole over there. They may dress differently.
It's a
you
quote
know,
of the day,
They
right?
may talk differently, but they're still an asshole. Okay. So for this to occur at this, you know, to even if they put the effort forward to investigate the case, what they should have done right at the beginning was say, okay, they screwed up at the scene. Let's see what else we can do. Okay. There's a lot of things that can be done. Okay. A lot of things that can be done. But instead of that, they chose to say, well, these hicks from Harrisburg, okay, they're never going to find out anything. They met with Josh and Sandee, and they fed them a bunch of garbage at the meeting that they had, okay, and gave them a copy of a couple different reports and told them, you know, okay, now be on your way, and thought that this was going to be the end of it. But thank God, you know, 2 friends of mine got in touch with me and had me meet with Josh and Sandee, and that's how this all started. But you know, it's just, you know, it's beyond me that anybody, okay, anybody in law enforcement could take part in something like this. Okay.
It,
You know,
it
I'm sorry.
It defies all logic. It defies all
I'm
logic.
sorry, but you know, they should be in a hole.
Yeah, I
Okay,
agree.
that's where I would begin. I would begin with the individuals who tried to cover this all up.
I'm sorry, Tom. I just want to follow up, and Laura wants to get a word in. But do you mean when you say this, are you talking specifically about Mr. Schwartzman or the
I'm
Schwartzman
talking
family?
about Mr. Schwartzman. Okay, this is an individual who checks on the conduct of other attorneys. Okay, and you tell me, why would you leave that apartment with those electronic devices?
And by the way, they had him. They had him for 2 days, correct?
Yes, only to have the police contact you on the 29th and say, "Hey, bring him in." You know,
Yeah.
why?
Laura, hop in there.
Yeah, I mean, just to give you a little taste of, you know, the way the police have responded to a lot of this, when Guy DeAndrea got the photos and saw all the bruises and asked the police what's up with all this bruising, they said, well, didn't she do Pilates? And he says in his deposition, last time I checked, Pilates was not a full contact sport. Correct me if I'm wrong.
By the way, I'm sorry, for those who don't know, and I was trying to get him on the show as well. He's been on the show before. Guy DeAndrea is a former homicide investigator, or a prosecutor, I should say, with the DA's office. So he's one of the few people that's seen the full file. Go ahead, Laura.
Just the callous disregard, like a young woman lost her life. She the evidence points to had been brutalized and murdered, and the Greenbergs lost their only daughter. And so to act like, well, didn't she do Pilates? I just
crazy. No, it's totally crazy. Scott Duffy, our friend, Philadelphia shoulder surgeon, is in here. We went to a Phillies game with her. She's very passionate about this case. Larry Krasner is a joke, she writes, and let's take advantage of the election. Shapiro is going to be vying for voters. Do not make it easy for him. This is a time when the pressure is effective. This is what I was saying. Someone said, no, STS is powerful. You guys, as part of STS, are very powerful. And that's why it happens in numbers. If everyone, trust me, if all 117,000 subscribers all tweeted at one time at Josh Shapiro, he's going to get the tweets and he's not going to be happy about it. But that's how you hold powerful people accountable. Scott Duffy, and I promise we're going to wrap in just a moment or two. Courtney H. with an interesting question talking about how do you deal with evidence all these years later. This is something that would be difficult to discuss with Josh and Sandee, who are going to be watching the show anyway, so I apologize. But could you exhume the body, Scott? Is there stuff that could still be, taken from this body all these years later?
Maybe Tom has something a little bit more, but I would assume absolutely that the body could be exhumed for further. And
If there's a need, the body can be exhumed.
Yeah. Scott, I'm sorry, Tom, Brianna has a question for you. Has Sam ever been deposed?
No.
No. What's interesting, Laura, is New York media is tough, but I guess not that tough. I mean, I used to be a reporter at Fox 5 in New York. As far as you know, has anyone ever reached out to, has anyone ever stopped Sam on the street with a microphone and asked him what happened that night? Oh, you're muted. I'm sorry.
Sorry. As far as I know, no. I heard a rumor that Fox Philly was maybe keeping eyes on him in New York, but no, that has, as far as I know, that hasn't happened. That's not to say it won't happen.
I'm going to read one final thing from Gavin Fish's op-ed piece. I'll put it in the show summary later. This is directly from Gavin's op-ed. On June 18th, 2022, I received an anonymous tip through my website that said Josh Shapiro, possible future VP, went to a small school with Judge Schwartzman's daughter. This is now the uncle's daughter, and that they likely have other connections as well. I went to work and confirmed that Josh Shapiro and Kimby, her nickname is Kimby Schwartzman, Kimmel, did indeed go to school together, and that they have other connections through their children's school activities. Mr. Shapiro called Mrs. Kimmel and her husband friends in a tweet in November 2010. I also found donations from the Kimmels to Mr. Shapiro's political campaigns. Laura, this is a lot to take in for anybody. Again, this death happened back in 2011. Most people believe it has to be a murder. I know you're working on a series. Just, I guess, your final thoughts tonight. What's ahead for you with this case?
You know, my question has always been, aside from what happened to Ellen that night and immediately on the scene with police, why at every step of the way, when every agency has had the opportunity to write the course, they've done the exact opposite? I've never understood, why the DA's office, the Attorney General, it makes me question, are there systemic injustices happening? But listen, there are developments happening with both civil cases, and I think we just have to stay tuned and see how the judges rule.
Laura Diamond, it was great to have her. For those who do not know, this is her first time as a best guest. She will be back. She is a journalist based in New York City. She works as a producer for ABC News 2020, and she's actually right now in the process of developing an independent docuseries on Ellen Greenberg, and we all know the attention that this case so badly needs. So kudos to Laura for working on this. Everyone knows Scott Duffy from the show, a retired supervisory special agent with a Delaware office. The FBI's fancy, so they call it a residency instead of an office. I'm going to call my studio a residency from now on, Scott Duffy. This is my residency. Scott Duffy, you're in that neck of the woods. This is being kicked over to Chester County. Are we going to see justice in this case? You said with Rachel Morin that they were going to catch the killer, and it appears they did. Are we going to get justice? Are we going to get an answer in this case, Scott?
This is a little bit different in the sense that with Rachel Morin, you had DNA of a perpetrator who had committed another crime And so it was only a matter of time in finding him. This is messed up from the beginning, and from what should be very trustful individuals, because law enforcement has that mandate. And Tom and Laura had both already said it, and I'll echo it. If it's so obvious that they are spending so much time to defend, and it's just got to be so tiring, as opposed to let the floodgates open, let what evidence does remain to speak for itself, and allow this to take the next step to investigating, to an undetermined, to a homicide, to who did it. And I will say, with all my years and having some very close friends who are prosecutors, I would be saying, I know we don't have much, but we do have something. But I think prosecutors would be pushing back to say, but you're not the one who's going to be fighting it in court. It is an uphill struggle. It is an absolute uphill struggle in a courtroom, but it should not be to reverse the current suicide. It should not be an uphill struggle.
Well put, and I hope that is overturned. By the way, I asked Gavin, he said motions need to be filed in the Supreme Court case by September 9th, but it could be up to a year. So even more waiting till we get some sort of ruling back from Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Govinda says, tweet at VP Harris. I see people saying that the email here for Josh Shapiro may be wrong. That's probably my fault. So we'll get you the right one in the show summary. I'll make sure the COE gets all the right info into the show summary for tonight. Last but certainly not least, this is retired Pennsylvania State Trooper Tom Brennan, who has been on this case like a pit bull on a stake, if you will. He's logged 25 years with the Pennsylvania State Police. I like him because he doesn't mince words. Tom, you have an open platform, as all of you guys do here. Anytime you want, I'm going to leave it open-ended for you. Your final thoughts. What's most important right now, and your final thoughts?
For me, it's been 11 years, and it's really, I understood the corruption in Philadelphia going into this case. Okay. Philadelphia is just rancid with corruption, political corruption. Okay. I don't think anyone could ever clean it up, but, we did, through some excellent work by Joe Pedraza and his partner, Will Trask. They did some excellent work in getting this before a judge who now has a really considerable interest in the case. And I feel a lot better now than I ever felt before. Okay. I honestly believe that we are going to, number one, be successful with the Supreme Court. And number two, we are going to be successful in either going to trial or settling this case otherwise. But we will settle the civil end of it. And then even if there isn't a trial, a homicide trial, okay, there are civil remedies, okay, in which we could identify a suspect, okay, a doer, and civilly go after that individual. Okay, we can do it that way. just like the Goldbergs did in the
OJ case.
O.J. Simpson case.
Golden,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. So there are civil remedies, and then what evidence is garnered from a civil proceedings can be used in the criminal proceedings. So, and it all takes time. And just like with Chester County, they interviewed me a year and a half ago. Okay. Year and a half. And after about an hour and 15 minutes on the phone with them, they finally realized, they said, "Oh, Mr. Brennan, you're interested in changing this from suicide to homicide. You're not investigating who did it." I said, "No. Let's find out, let's get somebody to say this is a homicide or undetermined. Then we'll say who did it." "Oh, okay. Goodbye." Now that was, and I haven't heard a word from them since.
Mm.
So, I'm glad that we, that Josh and Sandee, thank God that they had the wherewithal, and the stamina to take all these ups and downs. This has been one hell of a roller coaster ride for them.
Yeah.
And God bless them.
Yeah. God bless the Greenbergs for sure. I don't want to leave without this. Melissa G has been very vocal on social. She wants to get billboards put up. There's already a billboard. I want to say out by the football stadium. Anyone can email me survivingthesurvivor@gmail if someone knows a billboard distributor or someone that wants to help fund some billboards. Reach out to me. I will do my best to coordinate it. Again, a reminder, tomorrow night, we've got Josh and Sandee coming on. You're going to hear a lot of the same details, but it's important to keep the story out there. And please, this show, I don't say it often, share it, put it up on social media, put hashtags, Vice President, Josh Shapiro, whatever you need to do to get it swirling on the Twitter sphere and social media spheres. Very quick reminder, tomorrow, Carmen and I are flying out to Atlanta. It's her birthday on Wednesday. We're doing a book signing, Carmen and I, for Surviving the Survivor. If you're in the Philadelphia, you're in the Atlanta area, please come on out. Dr. G explains. He's going to be introducing us and there to greet everybody as well. So I'm really looking forward to that. But we're going to be doing a show from Atlanta tomorrow night with Gavin Fish, primetime investigator on this, and Josh and Sandee Greenberg, possibly Joe Pedraza too, the attorney, if we can get him on. So until then, thanks to these best guests. Love you, America. Love you, Philadelphia. And please keep justice for Ellen Greenberg at the forefront. Guests, stick around 1 second.